Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I'll be breaking this review up into parts and it is going to be non-spoiler throughout. I will have timestamps for each of the parts in case you'd like to skip ahead. The first two sections are definitely ones that some of you might not want to bother with because I'm going to be talking about how it relates to the Cosmere as well as the plot. So I know for some of you, you already have the information, you don't really need it. But then from there, I'll be getting into the tone, the tropes that are used, and the pacing. And then after that, we have the world building and the world itself. Then we have the humor. I also wanted to touch on the Spotify Speechify situation in case anyone is curious. And at the end, we'll go into overall thoughts. Jumping into it and starting with the Cosmere connections. I know a lot of times people wonder anytime there's a new Cosmere novel, what do I need to read before jumping into this one? And the story itself does not rely on you having read other books in the Cosmere. There will, of course, be some Easter eggs that you will miss if you haven't read other Cosmere novels, but that's becoming true of so many of the Cosmere books. The more you read in the Cosmere, the more you get those Easter eggs, and you have to start somewhere. And I would actually say this is a fairly decent place to start because it's very fun, it's very adventurous, it's pretty self-contained, and it's kind of this very cozy story that I think a lot of people are gonna have this sense of nostalgia when they read it, even though it's brand new. That said, if you have read, and this might sound kind of strange, if you have read The Final Empire or The Final Empire and its sequel, The Well of Ascension, but you haven't yet finished the Mistborn trilogy, you might not want to read this yet. You might want to finish the Mistborn trilogy. But if you haven't read any Mistborn at all, then you'll probably be safe. And I know that sounds a little strange, but it's because there is a very, very, very subtle reference that I think will just go over your head if you haven't read any Mistborn. But there is a certain name that you will probably recognize if you've read some of Mistborn, and I just wouldn't want anybody to see that name and then be like, wait a second, and then have certain experiences in the original Mistborn trilogy ruined for you. So to reiterate, if you've not read any of Mistborn, you're fine, but if you have read some Mistborn First Era, you might want to finish that up before reading this. You don't have to, though. It's going to be a very small thing, but overall, to be very clear, this story does not rely on other Cosmere books having been read for you to pick this one up. As for the setup of Tress of the Emerald Sea, we follow a young woman who goes by the name Tress, who has unruly hair and lives on this rock within the middle of this spore ocean, we'll call it, and it is a place that is almost uninhabitable. The population is very small. Tress lives a pretty ordinary life. She likes her ordinary life. She likes cups, she likes her family, and she likes a boy. And she's very content and she's happy with this rather small life. She doesn't really dream of anything adventurous and fun. She doesn't want to be one of the figures in the story. That changes, however, when the boy that she loves ends up disappearing, and she is determined to start a rescue mission to find him. And so that's kind of where the story gets going. Sanderson has said that this is inspired in part by The Princess Bride in a sense, and I believe he wrote this book for his wife because he was having a family movie night and they were watching The Princess Bride, and his wife said something along the lines of, I wish that the main female character of the story didn't just sit there waiting to get rescued. I wish she had a little bit more agency. And so Sanderson kind of used that idea to spark this story, and I do think that this ties into the tone as well, because for anybody that's seen or read technically The Princess Bride, you know that it has a very, very silly feel to it, and it's the kind of story that, this is going to be a, I guess, kind of dramatic way of putting it, but it almost transcends age range. It is something that can be enjoyed by the entire family, not because it's too vanilla, because it's bland, because there's not a lot of depth to it, or because it's just too silly, but because there's something for everyone within it, while simultaneously having this cozy feeling. It's something that kids will find funny, and I actually think that this might be the most young adult of Sanderson's Cosmere books. In fact, if I had to put it in the age range, I would say younger end of young adult. That doesn't mean it can't, of course, be enjoyed by adults or older teens or maybe even middle grade readers, but it's just one of those stories that is so delightful and it's fun and it's silly, but there are stakes, and it is at its core basically adventure fantasy. Tress goes on this adventure to try and rescue this boy that she loves, and she is a young girl. She's kind of finding herself, so you see that trope of self-discovery as she's on this quest. I do think that Sanderson, as he tends to do, sort of subverts certain expectations, or he knows the tropes so well that he is very self-aware of the ones that are being utilized in this story, and then either pokes fun at them or embraces them, and then you as the reader are kind of let in on the joke. The narrator, which you'll recognize if you've read other Cosmere books, the narrator is somebody who is very much talking to you and is relating to you and is poking fun at those individual tropes. So for example, not a spoiler, at the beginning of the story when Tress is deciding, I think I'm going to go try to rescue, I'm going to go on this rescue mission, she decides she's going to sit down and talk to her parents about it, and then the narrator is saying, you know, the fact that most of the time the heroes don't talk to their parents, and they really should. They should really include their family on these decisions. Things like that, where a lot of times in stories you have these young people going off on these very dangerous quests, and their parents basically don't exist at all. And so little things like that, where he will basically say, I know the fantasy genre, I know you know the fantasy genre, so let's have this adventurous, fun story that is going to make you feel nostalgic, but let's also kind of poke fun at the things that we all tend to either roll our eyes at in fantasy, or maybe we're like, well, here this is again. We're going to embrace those things and chuckle at them. I also want to point out that even though this is an adventure fantasy, I do think that it's falling into this new emerging popular subgenre of fantasy that is cozy fantasy. It's maybe not going to be cozy in the way that something like Legends and Lattes is, because it has much higher stakes than something like that. And it is a quest, it is an adventure, so you are going to see a lot of really dangerous things that our characters have to outwit or overcome. And there is the potential of them losing their lives on this quest. So there are serious stakes to this, but there is this sense of coziness just because the characters very much come to life in the short amount of time that you are with each of them, because there are side characters along the way. And there is this sense of everybody being given a chance, of being compassionate towards people, of recognizing that sometimes the reason people act the way they do is because they've never been shown anything otherwise. And so there's just these kind of heartwarming, I guess you could say, lessons to the story. It doesn't in any way, I would say, come across as preachy or anything like that. These lessons are things that maybe some of us, we know and we acknowledge, but we don't see it enough in our stories. And or you could also say that some of these are things that are really important for younger readers, that these are the kinds of stories we want for younger readers. A potential downside to this is that for some people, their favorite stories by Sanderson are the ones that tap into really heavy topics and don't shy away from those darker themes or those darker aspects of humanity. And this one, it has sprinkles of that, but I wouldn't say it's nearly on the same level as something like First Era Mistborn, which is almost apocalyptic, and you're talking about a class of people that our main characters are trying to get to rise up and rebel because they are treated essentially as slaves. Or something like Stormlight Archive, where one of your main characters is a slave. You have characters with really dark pasts, and you're also tapping into a lot of mental health. It is kind of embracing and diving into those heavier things. And I would say this story, it's gonna feel much lighter. It's not that those things don't exist, it's just not, we're not gonna dwell and sit in those things. So it is gonna have this sense of lightness. And I think that contributes to it feeling more accessible to a larger amount of ages. And I do think that contributes to it feeling cozy. But if you're going into this wanting that side of Sanderson's writing, I would say that it's probably not going to be as doom and gloom. It's not going to be as heavy, perhaps, as some of his other works. A plus, though, I think for a lot of people is that, at least for me anyway, it made the pacing very quick. It was just so delightful. It was just so fun. It was just such a wonderful, I guess you could say, treat at the end of the day to sit and read this story. You know, I was excited, like a lot of you, I'm sure, when we got our ebook to be able to dive into it, and it didn't disappoint. It was really fun. It was it was an adventure, and it was something that I was saying before. I think we're seeing this new, very solidified subgenre of fantasy as cozy fantasy, and I'm all about it. And I really like those fun, I like all the depressing stuff too, don't get me wrong. If you tell me a book made you cry, I'm like, what was it called? And I want to know and I want to look it up. But I'm also very excited anytime anybody is saying something was just so sweet and so fun and it made them so happy, but it also had heartwarming moments and bittersweet moments. And if you say all those things, I'm also going to be intrigued. And I also find those are easier stories to, not that I want to say read fast, because that's not the point of reading. The point of reading isn't to get through something as fast as you can, but I just think it makes the reading experience fly by, is I guess a better way to put it. Now jumping into the world and the world building. So because the narrator is so connected to you, I personally felt that the very blunt way in which the world was delivered to me, I didn't mind it. It didn't feel like info dumping, because I felt like it is a narrator talking to you, and so they're explaining everything to you. And so you don't have to try to figure out, read between the lines, and it doesn't take you forever because you're following along with the characters and you're experiencing the world as they're experiencing, and you have to figure things out for yourself. It's not that kind of world building. It's very much, this is how stuff works. This is what it's like on this planet. This is different from your planet in this way. And it's very easy to follow. And that doesn't mean that the world itself isn't complex, because this is, to me, one of Sanderson's most exploratory type of worlds, because it's so interesting and it's so different. I know something like Stormlight Archive definitely has that sci fantasy feel, where it truly feels like another planet, and this, I just feel like he had fun with this one. It felt like he took that concept to the nth degree and was like, let me show you sci fantasy. So the world itself is so interesting, and it's one where I'm almost sad that we really only are seeing this one story on this planet, because I found the world so interesting. And I want to add that I do think the plot itself is tied to the world building, because of the fact that this character is going on an adventure in this very, I'll call it dangerous terrain, this very alien-like terrain. And so you are discovering the planet as our character is navigating it. But I kind of almost feel like I didn't quite get enough of it. I wanted more of it. It is very contained as far as the characters you're following. You're really only following Tress. And so you're not exploring all these different areas. You're not seeing these grand cities. You're not really seeing the kind of world that you usually get with Sanderson. And that's in part because we just have this one perspective, but at the same time, I don't really think we needed more. It was so interesting that I kind of wanted more. And I definitely think, because I'm a character-driven reader, and I appreciate cool worlds, but because the characters kind of come first in my mind, that this is the kind of story that I could easily just reread and focus on the world the second go around. Not that I wasn't focusing on it this time, but I just feel like there's little details that I would probably pick up on more now that I'm more familiarized with it. And I like a story that has that reread factor, the rereadability, and I definitely think this one had it, just because of how cool and interesting the world is. If you don't know, I was kind of mentioning it earlier in the plot, where you have these oceans of spores that, when they come in contact with water or different kinds of liquids, they basically grow at a rapid pace. And there's different kinds, and these spores come from the many different moons that are hanging very low in the sky. And it just seems so interesting and so cool. And I'm so excited to see, because there's already artwork tied to this, but I can't wait for all the amazing artists that are also Sanderson fans to start doing artwork for this. Please, if you are an artist, sorry, this is a little self-indulgent, I suppose, but if you're an artist, please tag me on Instagram if you do any art for this story. I would love to see it. I would love to share it, because this, I can only imagine, for those of you who not only are creative-minded people, but are gifted with this wonderful skill where you can take the things in your mind and put it to your art. I would love to see it. I can picture it, but I am not gifted enough, and I really want to see more artwork for this world. Kind of switching gears, but the next point I wanted to touch on is the humor. I mentioned already that the story is very self-aware, And because of the narrator, it is also very cheeky. And I've said this word probably too many times at this point, but it's also very silly. I liked the humor. It's not my personal favorite kind of humor, but I enjoyed it. If you're somebody though who you pretty much never connect with Sanderson's humor, this probably isn't going to be suddenly the one that gets you. Really quickly, I wanted to mention the Spotify Speechify aspect of the story. So I did partially listen to the audiobook in both of these different areas. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Sanderson has talked about why he decided to have the audiobook for this not through Audible. I'll have his State of Sanderson linked where you can see more about it. But I tried out both, and it could have just been my device, I don't know, but Speechify worked fantastically, and I had no issues with it until chapter 37 of the story, and suddenly it would not load. I could not get it to keep playing. I tried everything. I tried deleting photos from my phone to free up space. I tried to see if there was another update, even though I had just downloaded the app. I tried turning my phone off and back on. I checked my Wi-Fi. I could not get it to work past that point, and I don't know why. I made sure that the audio speed was at 1x speed because I thought maybe it's a faster speed and it can't download now or something, and it did. I couldn't get it to work. So Spotify, I never had any issues with. This was the first time I've used Spotify for an audiobook, and Spotify worked just fine. So I hope it was just like user error and I was doing something wrong with Speechify. I did check. I went back to earlier chapters and it played the earlier chapters fine. I checked other audiobook apps. Like I said, I went to Spotify. I even checked Audible, and I checked all these other things, and everything was working fine. I don't know what it was. I don't know if anyone else experienced that, but I wanted to mention it because I actually would love it if there were more alternatives to Audible. I would absolutely love it. And so I'm willing to, of course, keep trying with Speechify. I really like the app, but I just hope that problem gets resolved because that was quite frustrating. Overall, I thought this was absolutely delightful. Such a wonderful, charming, silly adventure story. Quite different from a lot of the other Cosmere books, but different in a way that I wholeheartedly enjoyed. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I'd love to know how you feel it fits in for new readers into the Cosmere. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.